I thought she borrowed the car to get some milk for Mom, but no, she wanted me dead. I'm telling you this not to seek pity. I'm telling it so I don't lose my mind, so that someone out there knows my younger sister tried to kill me, not by accident, not by mistake, but with a plan, with calm precision, and with my own car. I am Clara Whitmore, 36 years old, a high school teacher in Redwood Falls, a small town in Western Oregon where people smile at each other in the grocery store but never truly ask if you're doing okay. My family isn't big. My mother, Lorraine Kingsley, retired early because of heart disease. Then there's Amber, the youngest, 6 years younger than me, who's always believed the world owes her a shot at getting rich. She once tried selling cosmetics online, failed, opened a nail salon, went bankrupt. Most recently, she texted me, "Clara, just lend me a little, $20,000. I promise I'll pay you back." I refused. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew. Amber doesn't understand the concept of paying back. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sent one last text, dry as sand. "You'll see." I didn't think much of it. Not until that day, Friday afternoon, 5:42 p.m. In early winter, the sun is retreating quickly behind the western hills. I had just finished my last class, packed up my lesson plans, and was driving home. The forest side road was familiar. I'd driven on it through snowstorms, rushing Mom to the hospital, even once when Amber was too drunk to make it home. But that day, something was different. First came the brakes, my foot pressed down, soft, slipping, empty, no resistance, no firm screech I was used to, only the sound of the wind, and the car began hurtling downhill. I screamed. My hands twisted the steering wheel wildly. Trees flashed past like knives slicing the air. My headlights flickered like the last convulsions of an animal about to die. I remember the moment my tires left the pavement. I remember my head slamming into the windshield. And I remember the feeling of my spine snapping like a dry twig. When I opened my eyes, I was in the ICU. The doctor leaned over me. "Ms. Whitmore, you fractured your lumbar vertebrae. The surgery was successful. But you will need crutches to walk, possibly for the rest of your life." His voice was gentle, but to me, it was like a gunshot. I couldn't breathe. I stammered, "Why?" "My car. It didn't have any problems." The police came the next day. A technician, careful with every word, said, "We found clear evidence that the brake fluid was drained. It appears someone deliberately did this. Did you let anyone use your car recently?" I froze. My throat tightened, and then I remembered. The morning before the crash, Amber had come over, borrowed my car to grab some groceries for Mom real quick. I didn't question it. Not for a second. I can't believe this. But then I opened my phone. Amber's message. Still there? "You'll see. Cold. Clear. A declaration of war. And a death sentence." 1 week later, the police knocked on my mother's door. Amber had just come back from getting her hair dyed, grinning, when they cuffed her right on the porch. I stood behind the curtain, gripping the cold metal of my crutch. This is only the beginning. Would Amber confess and me? Would I have the strength to survive what was coming next? I can't dream anymore. The pain has killed my dreams. Even when I close my eyes, I still see the ambulance lights, the screech of metal, and the sound of my spine shattering like glass under someone's heel. The first week after the accident, I lay completely still, Everything I used to do, such as driving myself, tying my hair, bending my knees, and putting on jeans, suddenly became a luxury. I remember the first time the nurse took me out of bed and placed the crutches in my hands. I pushed myself up. I fell. The pain wasn't just in my bones, it was in my pride. I was the woman who once coached students to compete in statewide speech tournaments. And now, I couldn't even take 3 steps toward the bathroom without crying from the pain. And Amber. She spent 1 night in jail and was released because my mother hired her a lawyer. Yes, my mother, Lorraine Kingsley, the woman who once held me and cried when my father passed away. She called me after the first hearing, her voice trembling. "Clara, there must be some kind of mistake." Amber said, "She didn't do it." I was speechless. The doctors, the police, and the forensic technicians all confirmed that the brake fluid had been completely drained. Only Amber touched my car that day. "I almost died. Mom, but she's your sister. Blood is blood." That sentence felt like a knife tearing through what was left of me. The neighbors whispered. Some said I was a reckless driver. Others claimed, "Sisters fight all the time. It doesn't mean she meant it." One parent of a student even texted me, "Hope you get well soon. Next time, make sure you check your car more carefully." I laughed, but inside, it felt like someone was pressing my head underwater. I was the victim, but no one treated me like one. One time, while I was practicing walking down the hallway with my new crutches, a little kid ran past me, pointed, and said, "Look, she looks like the witch from Harry Potter." His mother just pulled him away. No one apologized. I went back to my room, locked the door, and cried as if the pain had never been cried out before. I kept a journal, not to document my healing journey, but to remember that these wounds were real. Sometimes I imagined myself standing in court, looking my sister straight in the eye and asking, "Why did you do this to me? Why did you think money was worth more than your sister's life?" But then I'd hear my mother in the next room, on the phone, "Amber, hang in there, sweetheart. I'll find a way to get you out of this. Clara, she'll get over it eventually." I stayed silent, but in that very moment, my heart didn't just crack. It split wide open. A few days later, I went to the rehabilitation hospital. The nurse was pushing my wheelchair when she leaned in and whispered, "I hate to bring this up, but your sister was once a patient here, and you know what? She once said something disturbing." I turned to her. Her lips trembled. Her eyes avoided mine. She said, "Some sisters are born just so they know what it's like to lose." A chill ran down my spine. Amber wasn't just angry. She hated me. Maybe, for a long time, I had lived my whole life thinking I was the big sister who always protected the family. It turns out that I was living among smiling mouths with knives in their hands. That night, I opened my journal again. I didn't date the entry. I just wrote, "If they want to see me as weak, I'll show them just how strong I can be when I've been betrayed. If this story made you feel as breathless as I once did, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark so we can expose the untold truths together. The revenge has only just begun. Everyone has a breaking point." I used to think I was generous. I forgave Amber for lying to Mom, for using my credit card, even for taking my makeup and pawning it at a shop, because I was the older sister. I believed she would change. But after the accident, every bit of trust I had felt like a crack in glass, never fully shattered, but never able to heal. Amber showed no remorse. After she was released, she posted a photo online. A picture of her sitting in a cafe, hair in perfect curls, captioned, "Stay unbothered, karma's not mine to serve." I had to read it 3 times to make sure it was real. My face burned hot. My heart pounded as if someone had slapped my dignity straight across the face, and Mom. She shared the photo, added a heart emoji. I sat alone by the rehab center window. Outside, a light rain fell. The drops tapped on the glass, as if they too were asking, "Why haven't you done something yet?" I had tried to believe in justice. I went to court, presented evidence, spoke clearly, but Amber's lawyer was sharper or slipperier. Not enough evidence to prove intent. No witness saw her tamper with the car's brakes. It could have just been a mechanical failure. Mechanical failure. How ironic, since I was the one who paid the price for that failure. I had a broken spine. I lost my job. I lost my ability to work. And Amber, she went to bars, bought handbags, and was embraced by my own mother. That evening, Mom brought food to the hospital. I thanked her, but didn't touch it. She placed her hand gently on mine and said softly, "Clara, I know you're hurting, but holding on to hate, it will only hurt you more." I turned to her. "And what about the pain I'm already carrying? What about my dignity, my career, my legs?" She stayed silent. I could hear it in her eyes. "I'm sorry, but you're the stronger one. You can take it." That was the final period of my role as the victim. That night, I looked in the mirror. For the first time since the accident, I let the light show my face without hiding it. My hair was frayed. My eyes had deep shadows. My shoulders hunched like they'd been twisted. I saw a stranger, fragile, shattered, and I hated her. No, I hated that I had let others turn me into her. I took out my journal. I tore out the pages begging for sympathy. I began writing a plan, not a full plan, but the first thoughts. Where to start, how to take back my dignity without spilling blood, how to make Amber understand. The price of trying to kill someone isn't about prison or the law. It's about losing everything she's tried to build. 3 days later, I went to the bank. I asked for statements showing every withdrawal I'd made in the 6 months before the accident. I found it an unusual expense. On the exact day, Amber borrowed the car to go shopping. A purchase of a bottle of brake fluid at a used auto parts store in the suburbs. I printed a copy, folded it, slipped it into my bag. My hands trembled. My heart pounded. But inside me, it felt like the first spark had been lit. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for the name of the man who'd sold it that day. He was still working at the store. I hit call. "This is Clara Whitmore. 6 weeks ago, a young woman bought brake fluid at your store. I need to ask you a few questions." His voice was slow, deliberate. "She had striking red hair, didn't she?" I gripped the phone tightly. Amber had left a trail. I hung up, my heart pounding wildly. The clerk at the auto parts store was right. Amber had reddish copper hair, big loose curls, and a face you wouldn't forget. She came in that day, bought a bottle of brake fluid, and paid in cash. Didn't say much, just gave a faint smile. I remember clearly. The clerk added. Her face was calm, almost cold, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. That sentence lodged in me like a rivet right through my chest. Amber knew exactly what she was doing, and I had been naive to the point of stupidity. I started a new notebook, not a diary anymore, a plan, a map, a strategy. On the very first page, I wrote, "I will not let myself be a victim for one more day." I spent the first 3 days cutting out every distraction, turned off social media, silenced my phone notifications, stopped opening any so-called comfort messages. I needed space, a void where I could shed my old skin. I began training again. No, I still couldn't run, but I could take a few steps on crutches. First, 5 steps without leaning on a wall. Then, 8 steps without a nurse's support. Then, 10 minutes standing upright in front of a mirror without breaking down in tears. I changed my diet. No more instant noodles eaten in a rush. No more cookies stashed under the pillow. I cooked meals for myself, even if it was just boiled eggs and steamed vegetables, with my own trembling hands, but they were mine. In the mornings, I listened to law podcasts. I learned how to read court records. I Googled clauses related to gross negligence causing bodily harm. I began recording every detail that could be useful: old text messages, bank statements, store receipts, dates, times, locations. Amber had no idea what I was doing. She thought I was still crying, wallowing in self-pity. Meanwhile, I was rewriting my life, one cold black line of ink on a stark white page. I went to see a free legal aid lawyer in the city. His office was old, with peeling paint on the walls, but he listened. After I laid out everything in a voice steadier than I expected, he leaned back in his chair. "You've got a case," he said. "If we can get that store clerk to confirm, find security footage, or uncover any link between that brake fluid and your accident, we could press charges again." I nodded. I wasn't expecting to win quickly. I just needed to win. I knew this wouldn't be a short fight. I was still afraid. I still woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing Amber's laugh echoing behind me. I still flinched whenever someone slammed a door too hard, but with each passing day, the fear slowly gave way to something else, a hunger for control. I couldn't control that car on that day, but I could control the truth. And I would make sure the truth faced Amber head on. I walked into that old auto parts store. The clerk looked up. I set Amber's photo on the counter, my gaze colder than it had ever been. "That's her, isn't it?" I asked. He swallowed hard, nodded. She said, "She wanted to teach her sister a lesson." I pressed my lips together. "A lesson. Huh, fine. Now it's my turn to teach one." Amber once said I was too kind to fight back. I used to believe that, until I looked straight into the frightened eyes of the auto shop clerk and heard him repeat, "She said she just wanted to teach her sister a lesson." That sentence flipped a switch inside me. No more hesitation. No more swallowing my tears. I stood up, walked out of the shop, and delivered my first strike. I contacted a local reporter, Katie Marks, a sharp woman with a cropped haircut and a steely voice. I had taught her daughter 2 years earlier. We met at a cafe in town. I brought everything: photos, receipts, messages, bank statements, and the employee's statement. I can't write anything without clear, solid proof, Katie said. I slid the file toward her. She read. Her eyes widened. She stayed silent for a long moment, then looked up. "Oh my God, Clara, she actually did this." I nodded. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but because I had just thrown the first stone into a still pond. 3 days later, the article made the front page of the local paper. High school teacher nearly killed in car accident, victim of her own sister. No full names, no direct accusations, just a question. But in a small town like Redwood Falls, a question like that was enough to stir a storm. That night, my mother called. I didn't answer. An hour later, Amber's text popped up. "What do you think you're doing?" I didn't reply. I just took a screenshot, saved it in a folder labeled Evidence Threats. The next day, I accidentally, not really, stopped by the nail salon where Amber worked. She was sitting there scrolling on her phone, sunglasses on, looking tired. Customers had thinned out. One of the employees whispered to me as I was leaving, "You know, after that article, people started canceling, said they didn't want to sit in the chair of someone who almost killed a person." I pressed my lips together, didn't smile, but inside, something felt like a breath finally being released. I went home, opened a new note on my phone, Impact of First Strike. The article went public. The community started asking questions. Amber lost income. Her mental state shook, see young goal achieved throw her off balance, make her unsure who's behind it. I didn't want to destroy her with violence. I wanted her to be broken by the truth itself. But when you throw a stone, you'd better be ready for the waves that come back. That night, I heard a car stop in front of my house. Someone threw something onto my porch. I hobbled out on my crutches, an envelope, no return address. Inside, a printed photo. I, sweating and grimacing as I practiced walking, took a secret path through the hospital window. Below it, in messy handwriting, "Stay in your place if you don't want to fall again." I gripped the paper. My hands shook. My heart pounded like war drums. But instead of fear, this time I felt more certain than ever. I went back inside, picked up my phone, called Katie. "I'm ready. We're doing the second article. This time, you can use her name." If you've ever felt like your heart was trampled without mercy, stay with me. This journey is for survivors like me. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark. I had lit the match, and now, Amber was starting to pour the gasoline. After the first article, I was no longer the pitiful sister in the eyes of the town. I had become a troublemaker, a woman dragging her whole family into the public eye. Messages began flooding in. Some were words of encouragement, but most were criticisms. "You should have settled this within the family. Putting blood relations in the papers is a disgrace to everyone. No one really knows what's true or not. Stop playing the victim over and over." And my mother, she came straight to the hospital. In her hand was a letter that had been thrown at my doorstep, a photo of me learning to walk again with a threatening caption. Her face had gone pale. "What are you doing? Clara, I'm reclaiming the truth. Not like this. You're tearing this family apart." I turned away. I had no more tears left for words like that. That night, my Facebook account was hacked. A string of private photos of me in the hospital, me falling flat on my face while practicing to walk, were posted on an anonymous page with the caption, "Clara Whitmore hero or chronic victim fishing for pity." I froze. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the kitchen, the yellow light casting my shadow onto the wall distorted and endlessly stretched. The next morning, I went to the police station. I reported the photo leak and handed over the anonymous letter. They took my statement and filed a report, but in their eyes, I could see it was no longer urgent. Amber had not been arrested. She was only a suspect, and everything I had given them still wasn't enough to charge her. A week later, I received an express delivery package. Inside was a photocopied file from a law firm with no sender's name, a lawsuit. Amber was suing me back for defamation and damage to reputation. I sat there stunned, the papers trembling in my hands, not because I feared the lawsuit, but because her shamelessness sent chills down my spine. She wasn't just counterattacking. She wanted to erase my image completely, to shove me back into being the crippled freeloader she imagined me to be. After dinner, I looked straight into the mirror. Dark circles, hollow cheeks. My left hand was trembling slightly from exhaustion. "Are you ready to give up yet?" a voice in my head asked. "No," I replied. "But you're about to lose." "I'm not done." I opened my laptop, typed an email to Katie, the journalist. "We need to prepare the next article. I have a recording, a call where she once told me, if you died, it'd be less trouble. I think it's time people heard her real voice." Cliffhanger at the end of part 6. Just as I hit send, the doorbell rang. I cracked the door open, keeping my crutch hidden behind me. Amber stood there. Her gaze was as sharp as a blade, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. "So, you think you're smart, huh?" She took one step forward. "Then the real war starts now? Clara." Amber stood at my front door like a knife slammed into the table, sharp, cold, defiant, with no need for wasted words. "So the real war begins now. Clara." She said it, then turned away, the scrape of her heels on the porch steps sounding like a promise. I didn't respond. I just closed the door, slowly. Then, I locked the deadbolt 3 times. That night, I opened the recordings folder. I had saved that particular audio months ago, back when Amber had called me after I refused to lend her money. Her voice had laughed darkly into my ear. "If you were dead, it'd be less of a hassle. I'm serious." At the time, I thought, she's just mad. But now, those words felt like an arrow. And I had the bow. I sent the recording to Katie. Attached were photos, a copy of the witness statement, and my bank records. 1 email. That's all. But it was like loading a bullet into the chamber. 2 days later, the second article went live. This time, it had a name, a voice. Everything Amber couldn't deny. Accident of teacher Clara Whitmore. Recording reveals sister once made chilling remark. The story spread like wildfire in a dry summer. Not just in town. The whole state began to hear about my case. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages from former students. "We believe you, Miss Whitmore." That voice. "It's truly scary. You're so strong." A parent who had once doubted me sent a text apologizing. Short, but I read it 3 times. Amber vanished from social media. Her nail salon stayed closed for 3 straight days. A friend from town messaged me privately, heard she got her contract canceled. Too many clients protested. That day, I walked out of physical therapy with my crutch, but my head held higher. Something had changed, not in the world, but in me. I was seen. I was believed, not because I cried for pity, but because I fought for what was right. That afternoon, Katie called back. "Clara, we've received a request from the police department to reopen the official investigation. It may take time, but..." I nodded into the phone. My voice stayed calm, but inside, something bloomed. I went home, sat in front of the mirror, brushed my own hair for the first time in weeks, not to look pretty, but to touch the woman I had neglected through my pain. I opened my planner again, wrote one line in red ink. Day 43 after the accident. For the first time, I feel like a real survivor. But victories rarely stay quiet for long. That night, my mother called. "Clara, Amber's in the hospital. They found her unconscious in her car, overdosed." I froze. I stood by the window, my hand gripping the cold frame. A part of me wanted to ask, did she really mean to end it all? But another part whispered, or is this just another performance? St. Mary's Hospital, 9:46 p.m. Mom called for the second time. I didn't pick up. The third time, I answered. "Amber. She took pills. I found her in the car. She left a note." "What note?" "One line. I have no value left in this world." I sat there in silence. The crutch slipped from my hand. My mind went blank. Not from pity, but from caution. Something was off. The next morning, the news exploded like fireworks. Woman accused of harming her sister hospitalized for psychological breakdown? Family shattered by misunderstanding, or was social media pressure too much? I didn't respond to any reporters. I didn't post anything online, but I knew Amber had made her move, and this time, her blade cut straight through public opinion. Mom called me cold-blooded, said I dragged my sister into the public eye and turned my back when she collapsed. The neighbor who used to bring me cookies now avoided my eyes. Even a former student who once sent me encouraging messages wrote, "I'm disappointed. How could you take it this far?" I didn't defend myself, because defending myself now would only make people think I was flailing. I went to the hospital, not to visit, but I wanted to see with my own eyes whether Amber had truly broken down or was just playing another role. She lay in a private room, eyes closed, IV drip running, but when I opened the door, her eyes fluttered open. We looked at each other. No words. No need for words. I could see it clearly. She hadn't lost. She had only switched arenas. I went home and opened my inbox. Katie had sent an email. "The court has notified us that they're suspending the review to reopen the investigation. Amber's attorney requested a delay due to severe psychological trauma." I read each word like swallowing acid. Psychological trauma. Severe. What a cruel joke. I was the one who had nearly died in the accident, but she was the one getting all the sympathy. That night, there was a loud knock at my door. It was Katie. Her hair was messy, her coat half zipped. "Clara, we have a problem." "What is it?" Someone sent an anonymous letter to my office, threatening to expose an inappropriate relationship between you and me if I keep writing about this case. I froze. "You're being threatened. Not just me. They've dug into my accounts. They know my daughter's name." I buried my face in my hands. This wasn't just my story anymore. I had pulled someone else into the spiral, a good person, someone who had taken my side. I looked at Katie. My voice shook. "Do you want to stop? I'd understand." She answered, her eyes red. "No. But from now on, we're not just telling the truth anymore. We have to survive." I used to think, if I could just get past the physical pain, things would get better. But I was wrong. What's killing me now isn't the wound from the accident. It's the silence, the isolation, and the most terrifying feeling of all I've gone so far. But there's no way back. Katie avoided me for days, not because she was afraid, but because she was protecting her daughter. I understood. Mom didn't call back. She didn't open the door when I came by. The message I sent, "I don't want you to take sides. I just want you to hear me out once," was ignored. Or worse, read without even a reply. I sat on Mom's doorstep, the cold wind whipping against my face as if to remind me, you have nothing here anymore. That night, I dreamed of the accident again, but this time, when the car veered into the ditch, there was no screaming, just me calmly letting go of the wheel, as if some part of me had already accepted. If it ends here, at least, there's no more pain. I jolted awake. Cold sweat soaked the sheets. My hands were still trembling as they brushed against the scar on my back. I tried to eat breakfast, couldn't swallow a bite. I opened my journal, couldn't write a word. All the plans I'd once scribbled down now looked like the messy scrawl of a fool who thought she was a hero. What are you doing? Clara. How long are you going to turn your life into a war? Is anyone actually happy in this mess? Even you? That question kept looping in my head like the ticking of a clock pounding against my temples. I looked out the window. The ambulance from the day Amber was admitted still flashed in my memory like a red slash tearing across my chest. Could it be? She really had fallen apart. Could it be? I was the one who had pushed someone else to the edge. I felt like I was staring into a mirror. Only the reflection wasn't Clara Whitmore anymore. It was someone distorted, angry, unhinged, not a victim, not exactly a villain, just someone I no longer recognized. I broke down. Not the choking, sobbing kind of cry, but the silent kind, without tears, where it feels like your heart is bleeding out. I sat like that the entire afternoon until I heard a soft knock at the door. It was Katie. Her face was gaunt, but her eyes still had a faint spark. "I'm sorry for disappearing, but I haven't given up. I just got an anonymous email. It had a scanned copy of a handwritten letter from Amber to her ex-boyfriend. She wrote, 'Plain as day. I wish my sister hadn't survived.'" My hands clenched the arm of the chair. My voice was hoarse. "Can we verify it?" Katie nodded slowly. "And if we can, then this isn't your fight anymore. It's a case." Katie sat across from me, placing her laptop on the old wooden table, its paint long peeled away. "We need to verify the handwriting. If it's really Amber's, then what she wrote could change the entire game." I nodded, but deep inside, I still felt strange. Strange, because a part of me, after all the losses, still couldn't believe this could truly happen. I sat at the dining table the whole night, next to my crutches, next to a cup of tea gone stone cold, just staring at the scanned words in the email. "I wish my sister hadn't survived." The ink was messy. The word "hadn't" was written in bold strokes, as if her hand had stopped there, pressing down. I didn't know who Amber's ex-boyfriend was. But if this email was real, and that letter existed, then she had just confessed to herself without even realizing it. The next morning, Katie came back. She brought 2 other handwriting samples from Amber, a copy of an old job application, and a handwritten birthday card from last year. I studied the letters G, S, and H, all leaning slightly to the left, with a little upward flick at the end. Identical. We took all 3 samples to a handwriting expert in the next city. He was a quiet man with thick glasses and thin gloves. An hour later, he gave his conclusion 95% probability this is the same writer. I exhaled like I hadn't breathed in a week. My fingers brushed against the edge of the table, cold, but real. On the way back, Katie asked me, "Are you sure you want to go through with this? If we release this evidence, Amber will have nowhere left to hide, but there will also be no limit to how hard she'll hit back." I turned to look at her. She had no limits when she decided to kill me. I won't let the truth die one more time. That night, I wrote to my mother, just 1 page. No pleading, no blaming. I simply wrote, "If you ever loved me, then read what I'm about to show you, not to defend me, but because you need to know who's the one who truly has no way back." I printed the letter, walked out of the house myself, on crutches, all the way to the post office, step by step, painful, but steady. I came home, turned on my computer, typed an email to my lawyer, the investigation office, and Katie. I authorized the release of the full contents of the letter. If this is the moment Amber falls, then she will fall by her own words. Before I shut down my computer, I received an anonymous text. "If you release that letter, someone else will get hurt. Are you sure you want to keep going?" I stared at the screen, my faint reflection in the glass. But this time, I didn't see weakness anymore. If you've ever stood on the edge of giving up, but chose to take another step, then this is the story for you. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark to follow the next chapter, where the truth can no longer be twisted. I read the anonymous message again. If you make that letter public, someone else is going to get hurt. My heart clenched, not out of fear, but because I knew exactly who they meant. Katie, the woman who had dared to speak up alongside me, a mother with a young child, a career, and far too much to lose. I put aside my plan to send the letter that night, not to retreat, but to think it through more carefully than ever. This was no longer just a fight between me and Amber. It was a chessboard, and I could not allow those who stood with me to become sacrificial pawns. The next morning, I called my lawyer. An Asian woman is sharp, fast, and straightforward. "I've reviewed the entire file," she said. "If you can get an expert to verify that the letter is authentic and prove it wasn't coerced or fabricated, that's enough to reopen the criminal investigation." "What about the threat I received?" I asked. "We'll file a separate report, but a threat only works if you let it stop you." I sat quietly for a while, then wrote a single line in my notebook. "I will not back down, but I will not be reckless." I went to see Katie. For the first time in weeks, we didn't talk about the case. We just sat in silence, sipping cold coffee. She asked me, "If you could end this without putting Amber in prison, would you?" I thought for a moment. If she owned up to what she did, apologized publicly, compensated for the damage, and accepted fair consequences, I could stop. But if she keeps living like nothing happened, then no. Katie nodded. That answer didn't make me feel noble, just clear. We met with the handwriting expert again, and this time he agreed to sign the legal verification. I printed out all the documents in 3 sets, one for my lawyer, one for the police department, and one to keep on my desk in front of me as a reminder I'm not playing defense anymore. I sent my mother one final message. No begging, no explanations. Just one sentence. If you won't stand with me, then at least stop defending the one who pushed me off the edge. I didn't expect her to reply, but writing those words felt like unhooking a weight from my chest. I could breathe easier. On the last night before sending the entire file out, I slowly cleared my desk. Every page, every receipt, every recording, everything pointed to one truth. Amber wasn't just the person who caused the accident. She was the one who wanted me gone from this world without a trace. And me, I'm still here, still standing. I was sorting through the papers when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No words, just a picture. It was my mother sitting in a hospital chair. Her face was pale. The harsh light of the emergency room glinted in her vacant eyes. Right beneath it, a short line of text. "She'll be next if you send out anything else." I stared at the photo in the message. My mother in the hospital. Her face was pale as paper, her hand gripping the edge of the patient gown. The sickly green light from the ceiling cast down like a staged scene in a movie, and the short, chilling message, "She'll be next if you send anything else." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood still, as if my entire world skipped a beat. Not because I feared for myself, but because the worst thing I'd been dreading had finally come true. Amber was willing to go all the way, even if it meant her own mother. I arrived at the hospital after 9 p.m. Mom was still awake. The nurse said she'd had a spike in blood pressure, possibly from shock or prolonged sleeplessness. I didn't ask why. I just held her hand cold and soft, like dough. "I'm sorry, Mom, but if something happened to you at this point, it wouldn't be my fault." She looked at me. Her eyes were tired, without anger, without blame, just empty. I left the hospital without another word, and I knew it was time to end this cat and mouse game. 10:37 p.m. A message from Amber. "Meet me at the old place, just once, before you send anything." I went. The old coffee shop where the two of us used to sit every weekend back in high school. It was worn down now, just like the things I once thought would last forever. Amber sat in the farthest, darkest corner, an oversized jacket, hair tied carelessly, no makeup, but her eyes still carried something familiar, that cold, defiant challenge. "You've won," Amber began. "No, I haven't sent anything yet. But you will because you don't know when to stop, because you think you're better. You've always been that way." I stayed silent. Amber leaned closer. "You think Mom can survive knowing her eldest daughter put her youngest in prison? You think people will remember you as some brave woman or just an angry bitch who tore her family apart?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm not tearing the family apart. I'm just pulling back the cover on what's been rotting underneath all along." Amber let out a dry, sharp laugh. "What are you trying to prove that you're not weak? You've always been the shadow. I'm the one who could make Mom smile. I'm the one who could be loved." I took a deep breath. "If you truly believed that, you wouldn't have had to find ways to make me disappear. The strong don't need to erase someone else to survive." Amber clenched her hands under the table. I knew she was afraid, but she was still clinging to her last hope, making me soften, making me believe there was still something worth saving. "I don't hate you, Amber. I just no longer choose to forgive cruelty." I stood, placed a photocopy of the handwritten letter on the table. Amber stared at it as if she were watching herself stripped bare in the middle of a public square. I walked away. Just as I reached the door, I heard the chair scrape back. Amber rushed after me, grabbing my arm. "If you dare send it, I swear, you'll never have anyone on your side again." I turned to her. My voice is low, clear. "I don't need anyone on my side. I just need to be on the side of the truth." I walked out of the coffee shop, the chill of Amber's grip still lingering on my wrist. I don't need anyone to take my side. I just need them to take the side of the truth. For the first time after everything, I believed, completely, in the words I had just spoken. No wavering, no doubt, no pleading. The next morning, I put on the white blouse I had once saved for the day of my very first high school teaching interview. My hands still needed the cane, but my steps felt different. Not because my spine hurt less, but because my heart no longer bowed down. At 9:00 a.m., I sent 3 emails. Each one included a scanned copy of Amber's handwritten letter, the handwriting analysis results, the threatening text message, the witness statement from the store employee, and the old audio recording where she laughed and said, "If you died, it would be less trouble." My hands didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. Once sent, I stood up. 1 step, 2 steps, as if I was finally walking out of the darkness I had lived in for the past year. The news broke like a dam bursting. Clara Whitmore submits direct evidence accusing her own sister. Handwritten letter and audio shed light on a once controversial accident. Is justice arriving too late for the woman the whole town turned against? I got a call from the police department. My lawyer went with me. The statement was taken in a closed room, with no press or commotion. Just me, clear, calm, telling the truth. Not a single tear, only the clarity of someone who has nothing left to lose except justice. The next day, Amber was summoned. She no longer showed up in stylish coats or with softly curled hair. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen, and her voice almost gone. She only spoke 3 words when asked about the handwritten letter, not mine. But the handwriting expert sat right beside her, flipping through the comparison charts. Katie stood in the back of the room, and I could feel her gaze on me, not as a reporter looking at a victim, but as a friend standing behind enemy lines. I left the interview room. Amber was waiting in the hallway, alone. She looked at me. No anger, no defiance, only something that looked like fear and self-pity. "Are you satisfied now?" Her voice was hoarse. "I'm not satisfied." "Then what do you feel?" I looked straight into eyes that once felt so familiar. I saw memories. 2 kids are lying on a bunk bed, laughing over a silly jingle from a commercial. I saw the time Amber skipped school, and I lied to cover for her. I saw the things that had shattered. "I feel sorry because you could have chosen differently, but you didn't." Amber turned away. That night, I sat alone in the old kitchen. The wind slipped in through the door crack. No more message alerts. No more knocks at the door with threats. I picked up my cup of tea, my hand still trembling slightly. Revenge didn't make me happy, but the truth made me unafraid. I turned on the TV. The local station reported briefly, "Amber Whitmore, the subject of the investigation, has left town." Her lawyer declined to comment. The screen shifted to the next segment. A minute of silence filled the room. I let out a quiet sigh, but my heart was not yet completely light. I had won, but at what cost? Amber left Redwood Falls 1 week after the investigation. No goodbyes, no explanations. She just quietly disappeared, like a stain someone tries to scrub away from the family wall. I didn't know where she went, And honestly, I didn't care to know anymore. Mom didn't say a word the entire time. We had only one dinner together, like shadows sitting around the old wooden table, quietly tapping spoons against plates. You did what you thought was right. That was all she said. No approval, no disapproval. But her eyes, they no longer looked like the safe haven I once called my shelter. There was a distance between us, thin as paper but sharp as a blade. And I knew. Some things never come back. The police sent me a notice the case was still under criminal investigation, with possible charges of willfully endangering a life. I placed the paper on the table. No smile, no relief, just tired. For the entire month after that, I avoided anything related to Amber. No newspapers, no TV. I went back to physical therapy, taking a few more steps each day, leaning a little less on the crutch every night. I sat by the window and opened my old journal. The last page I had written said, "I will not let myself be a victim for one more day." I read that line over and over, and for the first time, I felt I had kept my word. But in return, I had lost so much. Not just time, not just dreams, but the image of myself. The sister who once believed kindness could save an entire family. One night, I got a text from an unknown number, just 2 words. "I'm sorry." No name, no emoji, nothing else. I knew it was Amber, and I didn't reply. I didn't know if she meant it, and I no longer cared because I understood an apology can't undo the days I lay motionless in a hospital bed. It can't bridge the gap between my mother and me. It can't bring back the straight, steady walk I used to have. A victory doesn't make you feel lighter. It just ends a struggle. And what follows is the stillness, cold and hollow, like standing in the middle of a house that's already burned down. You know you've survived, but everything around you is ash. I don't regret it. I just feel the loss. Loss for the girl named Clara, who once believed everything could be healed with kindness. Loss of the last hug between 2 sisters. That may never happen again. I closed the journal. I didn't write another word. Not because the story was over, but because some chapters don't need to be written down. They only need to be felt and buried in silence. The next morning, I woke up early, not out of obsession, not out of fear, just to see the first light on the roof for the first time in months. I stepped onto the porch by myself, without a crutch. That morning, I stepped out onto the porch without needing my cane. No applause, no witnesses, no spotlight, no cameraman, just me. My legs trembling slightly, and the thin early summer sunlight resting on hair still damp with dew. And I realized that was the real victory. Quiet, but complete. I no longer live in the old house. A month after the investigation was turned over to the state, I left Redwood Falls, not to run away, but to breathe, to be a person no longer forever tagged with the word victim. I now teach part-time at a vocational school in the neighboring city, no longer standing at a podium lecturing on classic literature. Instead, I guide students through the skills of writing resumes, interviewing, and composing handwritten letters, things people often dismiss. Yet they are the very first doorway to decency. I teach small things, but I teach them with my whole heart. Because I know, sometimes, the smallest things are where people cling to their last piece of humanity. One afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten. Every stroke was my mother's familiar handwriting. I don't know what to say. but I've read everything you sent, and I know. I was wrong to let silence kill the love in this family. I don't expect you to forgive me. I only hope you can live a little lighter each day. I read the letter 3 times. Didn't cry. Didn't reply right away. Just folded it neatly and placed it in the wooden box where I keep the things I haven't yet forgiven but no longer resent. I saw Katie again a few weeks later. She invited me to lunch and brought a small box. Inside was a keychain with a faded engraving, "Keep walking, even if you walk alone." I smiled. She didn't know. That was the very phrase I used to whisper to myself every night in the hospital. Another day, I spotted a young woman on crutches passing by the bus stop. She stumbled. Her bag dropped. No one helped. I stepped forward and picked it up. She looked at me. I looked at her. No words were needed, but I knew I had just given someone else something I once needed a person who didn't ask what happened, but simply reached out. I still carry the scars, both on my body and in my memory, but I don't hide them. Don't make excuses. Don't need anyone to understand, because I already understand myself. I didn't win because Amber lost. I won because I no longer let her darkness pull me under. Someone once asked me if I could go back and if I would choose forgiveness. I thought for a moment, then answered, I'd still choose the truth. But this time, I'd choose to forgive sooner. Not for her. For me. Another morning, I took a walk through the small park near my home. I looked up. Sunlight streamed through the leaves, touching my cheek. No one called my name. No one recorded it. But I knew in that very moment I had found my new destiny, not as a victim, not as an avenger, but as a survivor, a free person. If you've ever felt alone in your pain, I hope this story has touched some corner of your heart. The truth can be cruel, but it is also the way out. What do you think of Clara's choice? What would you do if you were her? Leave a comment below. Share this video if you think someone else needs to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark so you won't miss the next brave journeys. Because justice is not just about laws. It's about the story of every single person